This is my 6.6 US gallon or 25 litre Walstad cherry shrimp tank, and it's 200 days old today. Unlike some tanks, it doesn't rely on a filter, it doesn't have a heater, and there's no CO2 injection. It operates on a simple self-sustaining system, and the substrate is key, with there being a layer of topsoil that's capped with fine gravel. But the topsoil isn't just dirt that provides essential micronutrients for the plants, it also hosts waste-eating bacteria colonies that naturally increase the CO2 levels in the aquarium to help the plants grow. The fine gravel also serves an important purpose, and it's not just for looks. It caps over the soil and prevents any excess nutrients from leaking into the tank's water column and stops any mud from spreading around the tank, but I would recommend you use a thicker capping layer than I have, as this tank was just a test. The Rotala rotundifolia at the back of the tank serves as more than just a decorative plant, and it acts as a natural water purifier, keeping the water parameters safe and stable. The shrimp are also part of the system, and they're not just inhabitants of the tank, as they graze on food, algae and biofilm, with their waste helping to nourish the plants, completing the cycle. Now, just because this tank doesn't rely on a filter, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have one, and I did add a small nano hob around 6 weeks ago for some mechanical filtration. I feed my shrimp a lot of leaves and snowflake food that kick out a lot of particles into the water column, and it was just starting to annoy me, so I decided to get some mechanical filtration in there, but more on this later. So let's dive into the update, and the biggest change is that the 2 adult Medaka rice fish that I added in here around 8 weeks ago have been moved over to my dedicated Medaka tank. I didn't make this move until the Medaka fry in there were large enough to avoid being eaten by the adults, but so far everyone's getting along fine, but there is an algae issue in my Medaka tank that I'm treating. But when the Medaka were in my Walstad shrimp tank, I did notice a surprising benefit, as the increase in bioload from the 2 Medaka fish definitely seemed to boost the plant growth. I really do think that the extra bioload helped fix the issues with my Bacopa caroliniana having holy leaves, and I do think it helped speed up the Rotala rotundifolia plant growth with the extra nutrients. So with the Medaka gone, I wanted to maintain the higher bioload in this tank, so I decided to get 2 guppies, and so far they seem to have settled in nicely. I've only been in here a week, but there hasn't been any major problems, and they've swam past shrimp multiple times without trying to eat them. So I'm hoping that the guppies bioload helps to maintain stable plant growth in the tank, and there hasn't been any major problems with aggression between the 2, but there is a little sparring during feeding time. Moving on to the actual cherry shrimp, and things are going very well. Not only are the cherry shrimp surviving, but they're actually thriving, and I would guess that this tank was recently home to more than 100 cherry shrimp, as they are constantly eating the food and breeding. But with Christmas coming up, a few of my friends and their children have set up aquariums, and they've asked me for some shrimp. So over the last week or so, I have been netting a few of these out to give away, and I've moved some onto my own other tanks, and I've given some to my friends. I did move 10 to the Medaka tank that I mentioned earlier, not to treat the blackbeard and staghorn algae you can see, but there was a diatom algae bloom as well that they've dealt with. I've also moved 5 over to my celestial pearl danio tank as well, and they've done a great job of dealing with the diatom algae bloom that this tank had. Then I gave 20 cherry shrimp to one of my friends for his new tank, and 15 to another friend for his daughter's new tank. Now in total, that's 50 shrimp removed from this small tank in just a week, but despite the noticeable dip in the population, I'm still amazed at how many shrimp are still in here when they come out for feeding, and that's another reason that I wanted to get the guppies in there as quickly as possible to maintain the bioload, because a lot of the shrimp have been removed. I do think that the additional plant growth on the Rotala rotundifolia from the fish's bioload is one of the bigger factors to increase the surface area for more biofilm growth, giving the shrimp more areas to feed, so more food means a higher survival rate for the baby shrimp. My regular viewers will know that I take a survival of the fittest approach with these tanks, where my larger shrimp are left to naturally outcompete the younger shrimp for food, keeping the population in check. When the larger shrimp reach the end of their lives, they become food for the next generation, sustaining the cycle with a steady number of baby shrimp grown at all stages in the tank. So far this system's been working really well for me, and I'm going to use it in all of my other shrimp tanks and shrimp jars. But the main limiting factor for the population in this tank is actually the food supply, not the available space. So I do supplement the diet of the shrimp in here to support a larger population than the tank would naturally be able to support, and I'm using algae wafers, which I'm using a lot right now because they're close to expiring. I usually try to offer a variety of foods alongside algae wafers, including shrimp snowflake food, fluval bug bites, bloodworms and leaves. As I mentioned earlier, I did add the hang-on back filter to this tank for some mechanical filtration a while back now, but since I've been focusing on feeding algae wafers to the shrimp, there's really not that much particulate matter being kicked into the water column. Due to this, I am thinking of just adding algae wafers and potentially bug bites to the shrimp tanks as a food source, as the bulk of the particulate matter in the water column does seem to come from snowflake food and the leaves. In theory, this lets me remove the small hang-on back filter, as there'll be no need for mechanical filtration, and there's plenty of plants in here to keep the water parameters safe and stable. I'm also curious to see how long it takes for the shrimp population in here to bounce back to the normal levels after recently removing 50 shrimp. There are a couple of buried females carrying eggs in here that I've seen recently, but this tank doesn't have a filter and I'm relying on the ambient room temperature to keep the shrimp safe. Thankfully, this room should stay within the recommended ranges for both the guppies and the shrimp in here during the winter months. That said, I have read that cherry shrimp breed a lot slower in colder water temperatures, but time will tell. So moving on to the plants in the tank, and most of the plants I chose for this tank do have a dedicated job. Let's start with the Rotala rotundifolia, as it's the most important plant in here, and its main job is to naturally purify the water, using up toxic nitrogen compounds and heavy metals for nutrients that could harm the shrimp and guppies. But as I mentioned earlier, the Rotala rotundifolia also provides a lot of surface area for algae and biofilm growth that the cherry shrimp then feed on. The Rotala has been grown a lot faster than it did earlier in the tank's setup, but I am thinking it's more to do with the increased bio load from the fish than anything else. Next up is the Christmas moss, and I do love the way this looks, as it's filling out as a nice decorative carpet, but that's not its only purpose. Most types of moss add a ton of surface area relative to their size in the tank, giving the shrimp plenty of spaces to graze on algae and biofilm. Another bonus of the Christmas moss is that it adds a lot of hiding spots for the baby shrimp, and you can often see them hiding in the lower levels of the moss, grazing on the algae and biofilm that they have access to. Then there's the Eleocharis on the left and right behind the driftwood, but I have to admit I've never had Eleocharis do well in any of my tanks. There's always an issue with growth, but if you can get this to thicken up in your own tanks, it can act as a moss alternative, offering additional grazing space for the shrimp. There are some Bacopa caroliniana stems in the background on the very left and very right of the tank as well. This is the only plant in here that doesn't have a dedicated job. I literally decided to add it when I set this up because there was a lot of discussion on Reddit about if Bacopa thrives in dirted tanks or not. So far it's been doing fine in here, and I'm pretty sure the main problem with the discussions on Reddit back when I set this up was that people failed to realise how slow this plant actually grows. They see that it's a stem plant and they expect faster growth, but Bacopa caroliniana is just a very slow grower. That covers the original plants that I added back during the tank setup, but there are two new additions. There's water lettuce and duckweed. I initially added the water lettuce back when the adult Medaka were moved into this tank, as their roots provide the perfect surface for Medaka eggs, but unfortunately there does seem to have been a piece of duckweed on the water lettuce that hitchhiked in here, and it's since taken over the tank. I do often see shrimp grazing on the underside of the water lettuce and duckweed, especially if there's leftover food amongst it once I've fed the guppies. So I've decided to leave the floating plants in the tank, at least for now, but in all honesty duckweed is an absolute nightmare to remove completely anyway. To quickly round off this section of the video, I am very happy with the plant growth in here, but we are moving into the winter months, so I'm curious if the slightly lower temperatures will cause any problems. Finally, let's talk about the aquarium's water parameters, as I did have a wobble in the last update a few months back when I first added the Medaka, because I made the mistake of not gradually increasing their food supply, which caused an ammonia spike. Since then I have kept a close eye on the amount of toxic ammonia and nitrite in here with my test kit, and I'm happy to report that there's actually been no more problems since then. The addition of the duckweed and water lettuce will definitely be helping with this though, as they both act as a natural barrier against the toxins. Now I know that a lot of people in the hobby still think that aquatic plants only absorb ammonium and nitrate, but this is definitely not correct. This research found that at least one species of duckweed actually prefer to consume nitrite over nitrate, and this research found that water lettuce was one of the best plants in their study for removing nitrite in water. My point is that having so many floating plants on the surface will definitely be helping to maintain safe and stable water parameters for my shrimp and guppies, which adds that extra safety net if I do decide to remove the small hanging back filter. Now I stopped tracking TDS a long time ago, and I've recently stopped tracking KH and GH too, but I do have soft tap water, and that can be tricky for Eleocharis shrimp when it comes to molting. I used to add shrimp salts during my water top-ups to counter evaporation to increase my tap water's hardness in the hope that it would let the shrimp molt without issue. That said, I haven't been adding shrimp salt to my tap water when I've been doing the top-ups for around 6 weeks now. So far I haven't actually noticed any problems with any of my shrimp tanks, and I've seen countless molds from the shrimp suggesting that they are able to mold without issue. I just want to quickly touch on my future plans for this tank. My current plan is to keep it going for as long as possible, but I do know that people say Walstad tanks can start having issues after the 1 year mark. But I've seen a lot of people say a lot of things that just haven't turned out to be true with my setups in my own fish room, so I am curious to see what happens as this tank continues to age. Now I know this might sound a little silly, but this is actually my oldest shrimp colony, and I got the original shrimp that started this almost 2 years ago now, so it does have some sentimental value to me as it's what got me back into the hobby. I would absolutely hate to lose this colony because of something going wrong in this tank, but like I mentioned earlier, I do now have backup colonies of this forming in my Medaka tank and my Celestial Pearl Danio tank. But even with those backup colonies in place, I'm still hoping that there's no problems with this tank and I'm able to keep it going long term for as long as possible, just to document it all on YouTube for everybody else to learn from. Now I am looking forward to the next update on this tank, but I'm not sure if I'll do it at the 300-day mark or the 1 year mark. Time will tell depending on how busy I am. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end. Thanks for watching, have a good day, and I hope the video's been helpful.